We're back this week with another episode in our Seminole County series.
If you're just joining us, then we would encourage you to take a look back at the previous 3 episodes in the feed.
Especially because we broke news on COINTELPRO for the first time last week.
With the help of Bennett Tomlin and @gal_suburban on Twitter, we were able to determine that Organic Fresh Coin was not an authentic initial coin offering. This was brand new reporting, which we will be publishing on Protos soon.
We also want to make a modest plea for you to support us on Patreon. This will always be an independently produced podcast. You won't hear an advertisement for food delivery or audiobooks. We also promise to never paywall our investigative episodes, like the one you're about to hear. Every penny we get from our listeners translates directly into more time spent on this podcast.
And less time driving rideshare.
Anyway, on with the show.
Associate of Matt Gaetz is accepting a deal with prosecutors and pleading guilty to multiple federal charges, including child sex trafficking. Joel Greenberg also agreed to cooperate with a reported investigation into the Florida Republican congressman as the Justice Department considers whether to bring charges against Gaetz, a Donald Trump ally.
It's also being reported that Gaetz may have paid for sex with women he met online. That story has since been confirmed by his whole vibe.
Court papers say Greenberg engaged in so-called sugar daddy relationships where he paid for sex. But they don't mention Gaetz by name. During a rally over the weekend in Ohio, Congressman Gaetz continued to fiercely maintain his innocence and dismiss the child trafficking allegations.
Gaetz then defended himself, releasing this very normal statement. See if any of it sounds suspicious to you. Matt Gaetz has never paid for sex. Matt Gaetz has never, ever been on any such websites whatsoever. Colin Jost does not believe you. Colin Jost thinks you've been to all the websites.
We're focusing today on Ring 2 of Seminole County tax collector Joel Greenberg's circus.
In the first and second episodes of the Seminole County series, we laid out the relationship between Greenberg and Chris Storworth, a local politician turned lobbyist and real estate mogul.
According to federal investigators, Greenberg sent a letter penned by Dorworth to the Seminole County commissioners in an effort to sway their vote on Dorworth's proposed Rivercross housing development.
We are joined on this episode by Jay Miller, who helped found Save Rural Seminole, an organization that opposed Dorworth's Rivercross development.
Miller worked with Brian Beute on Save Rural Seminole. We spoke to Brian Beute in episode 22.
Miller was not a direct political opponent of Greenberg like Beute, but nonetheless suffered a strikingly similar set of consequences for his involvement in local politics.
But before we get to that, we need to talk a little more about Chris Dorworth.
Chris Storworth was active from a young age in Florida politics. What do we know about his early involvement as a student?
Dorworth graduated from a large Orlando prep school in 1994. He then attended the University of Florida, starting that fall, and graduated in the summer of 1998. He was the 2-term chair of the Florida Student Association, and from the fall of 97 to the spring of 98, he was the University of Florida student body president. He was also a member of the Florida Blue Key organization, whose main role today is organizing the university homecoming, but was founded in the 1920s as a fraternal organization seeking to bring the fathers of Florida's ruling class to campus once every school year to have them rub shoulders and network with the sons attending the university. Eventually, he goes on and gets an MBA from Duke, but that won't be the extent of Dorworth's involvement in education, particularly in the state of Florida. As of this moment, he's currently listed on the board of the Florida Education Foundation with Don Gates, who's the father of U.S. Representative Matt Gaetz.
So Chris Dorworth began his career outside of student politics by getting involved in the Florida Republican Party. What did he do to cut his teeth in local elections?
Dorworth's political career seems to have started in 2003 when he was elected or appointed president of the Seminole County Young Republicans, and then in 2004 became the chairman of the Bush-Cheney re-election campaign in Seminole County. That same year, he would become the vice chairman of the Seminole Planning and Zoning Commission, which was an appointed role, but nonetheless important to the credentials and portfolio of someone who would go on to take a vested interest in the planning and zoning of Seminole County. In 2006, he wins his first election in a countywide that made him chairman of the Soil and Water Conservation District, right? So we have, in these early years of Dorworth's campaign, we have a significant role among the local Republican Party, and we have his first election victory that led him to be in charge of the Soil and Water Conservation District, which is a role you're going to find is relevant to the creation of housing developments in rural Seminole County in particular. In 2007, he's elected to the state house for a district that doesn't actually exist anymore, but at the time, which included parts of Orange and Seminole County. And it's this same year in 2007 that then Governor Jeb Bush appointed Dorworth to be on the Seminole County Community College's Board of Trustees.
So in 2007, Dorworth takes office. What happens then?
So Dorworth starts his first term in office in 2008, right? After his initial 2 years in the state house, though, he was picked by his Republican colleagues as the speaker-designate for an eventual 2014 legislative session. And this is similar to how other states do it, but just in case your state doesn't have this particular idiosyncrasy, what we're imagining here is we have a assembly member in the Florida State House who, upon completion of their first, of their term as a freshman legislator, is selected by the Republican Party to be the ranking member of the Florida House of Representatives. And they selected him to become that ranking member for the 2014 session, right? So it's the 2010-2012 legislative session, and the Republicans vote within their caucus to make Dorworth this designated Speaker of the House, assuming the Republicans can have control of the House in 2014, but also assuming that Dorworth will still occupy his seat by the start of that session. However, Dorworth spent a significant amount of his time in office under one form of an ethics investigation or another, the most significant of which was in 2011 when former Governor Rick Scott appointed a friend of Dorworth, Scott Batterson, who was a developer and a road engineer, and then became the head of the Orlando-Orange County Expressway Authority, right? And so obviously this was identified by people in Orlando, especially the editorial board at the Sentinel, as a conflict of interest, right? And it was noted that Dorworth had been listed as a top reference for Batterson in his pursuit of this position at the Expressway Authority. In 2014, Dorworth was indicted by a grand jury and charged with violating state public record laws for his role in serving as a conduit for passing agency information between the board members. Again, this is in 2014, which was the year that Dorworth was supposed to begin his legislative session as the Speaker of the Florida State House. However, in 2012, Mike Clelland ran as a Democrat and deposed Dorworth in the gubernatorial election, winning a critical mass of Mitt Romney voters who refused to hold their nose and vote for Dorworth. What we should take away from this story about Chris Dorworth and his politics is that, in much the way we're going to see occurred with the Rivercross housing development, Dorworth has perennially underestimated the organizing capacity of people in Seminole County, right? He thought that he could wine and dine his way to a Speaker of the House position in the Florida State House within 6 years of taking office, and would have gotten it too if it weren't for those meddling Republicans in the Seminole County, electoral body. However, what we're going to see in the Rivercross case when we talk to Jay Miller is we'll hopefully be able to understand the similarity, the Achilles heel, if you were, of Chris Dorworth's audacity and entitlement.
So then it's through the revolving door and into a lobbying job. Tell us, Michael, about Chris Storworth and Ballard Partners.
And this is something that we had talked about with Brian Beute, in fact. And it should be no surprise to anyone who follows American politics that there is this revolving door between, as you say, lobbying and politics. Dorworth went to work for Brian Ballard's lobbying firm after losing his position in 2012. Brian Ballard's a political insider in Florida and D.C. He was on the Florida finance committees of the last 3 Republican presidential candidates. He organized Trump's inaugural, as well as the inaugurations of Governor Rick Scott and Ron DeSantis, as well as their predecessor. And so Ballard is an incredibly significant person, a financier, a kingmaker, a lobbyist, right? And his firm has continued to grow, especially since the election of Donald Trump. They now claim to be, and I'm reading here from their public relations, quote, a first-class bipartisan government relations team that represents clients across the federal landscape, end quote. They've recently expanded their office to Tel Aviv under co-managing partner Robert Wexler, as a former U.S. representative. In April of 2018, Politico ran an article calling Ballard the, quote, most powerful lobbyist in Trump's Washington, end quote. And Dorworth didn't leave Ballard until this spring, when the Greenberg Gates story broke and threatened to bring attention to the relationship between Dorworth and those two characters.
And this brings us back to Rivercross, which Brian Beute introduced us to in episode 22.
That's right. In the first episode of this series, we met Brian Beute, who got involved in politics because of people like Dorworth and his efforts to develop parts of Seminole County set aside in 2004 by voters in a referendum. It was only when Beute declared himself as Greenberg's opponent for the Republican primary that anonymous letters began to arrive alleging illegal conduct on the part of Beute. Then, Jacob Ingalls arrived on the scene to slander and libel Beute with his Central Florida Post media outlet.
So we're joined now by Jay Miller, who in the summer of 2018 also became the target of Jacob Ingalls and Chris Dorworth. See if you can recognize the similarities between the story Miller unfolds and the one Brian Beute told us just a couple weeks ago.
I'm joined today by Jay Miller. He's a rural Seminole County resident and co-founder of Save Rural Seminole with Brian Beute, who we had on the show for episode 1 in this series. Jay, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Jay, you're a resident of Seminole County. How did you take an interest in the Rivercross housing development?
Started hearing rumblings about Sanford using a lot of their property along Route 46. Now, a lot of people don't know that the city of Sanford owns a ton of property along State Route 46, numerous multi-hundred-acre parcels in the Geneva area. They're nowhere near Sanford, but they own these properties. And the Chris Dorworth project popped up about the same time that Sanford was saying that they wanted to run a water main out here and tap into the Geneva bubble to deliver water to their new housing projects that are kind of near where Lake Mary Road and 46 intersect in that Midway area. Sanford really wants to annex that area in, and they would really love to build that all out, which is fine because that's allowed in that area. But the water over there is not suitable, and so they needed a source of water. So we started looking at how that would affect our area, because the Geneva bubble is what we get our drinking water from, and it's pristine water, and they know that. And then around the same time, we had started getting wind from friends in Chileota that Chris had put in for the River Oaks project. And when I started hearing about the sizes of it, it really kind of boiled my blood, because it's a gorgeous property. It's huge oak trees. It's just pristine. And it started really getting me upset. Well, then we started hearing within a couple of weeks of other contractors or developers, I guess, that wanted to come into our area and start buying large parcels of property to put in developments. And that's not what we want out here. We moved to the rural area to have it stay rural. I had thought about, what can we do? And I had spoken to numbers of neighbors and friends that live out here about the possibility of incorporating Geneva. Because Geneva is unincorporated, we basically have no say over our government other than the county commission, which is a 5-1. We have one representative, and if the others vote against anything that we want, we don't have say. We don't have local control.
And of course, in 2004, residents of Seminole County had voted to preserve certain portions of the county.
That's correct.
And to preserve that land so that the commission would have to vote in order for developments to be pursued in these parcels of land.
Correct. And there was a lot of concern of big money influencing the county commissioners that didn't live in this area and really didn't have to worry about rural residents voting them out. There were a couple that we were very worried that would possibly flip the other direction and set a precedent by allowing one large development. Now it opens the floodgates to all of the other developers. And the reason they want to come out here is because it's cheaper, and because closer to town, there's not really any large parcels left. Mm-hmm. They want these 700 acre parcels because they can put in, 3,000 or 4,000 homes and make a couple $1 million. So that's their business. That's what they do, and I get it. But we would like to keep the area as much like it is now as possible. So at that time, I actually rented the Geneva Citizens, Geneva Historical Society's hall, and I advertised on Facebook and on the local page that we were going to have a meeting to discuss the possible incorporation of Geneva. And it was more to try to get an idea of whether or not Geneva residents thought that it would be something that we should pursue, because it would have to be done during an election. It would have to be a ballot initiative to incorporate. That's when we started the problems, and that's the troubles. So the Geneva Historical Society is in the original Geneva School, and there's a front step area that's like 5 or 6 steps that go up and into the building. Really cool building. Right before we were ready to start, there was a younger gentleman sitting on the stairs with 2 other guys standing next to him. They're all under 30. And it was quite warm outside. I mean, it was, late spring, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all wearing flannel shirts, which I thought was strange. But the one gentleman said, I'm with the press. And he pulled out like the lanyard that goes around your neck, and he held up, and it said press on it. It had his photo. And I said, what are you with? And he says, oh, well, I'm with the newspaper, the Central Florida Post. And I said, oh, okay. And he says, would you allow us to come in and take some photos and attend the meeting? I said, yeah, it's open to everybody. You can come in.
And of course, the Central Florida Post being the now defunct, or at least suspended, outlet of Jacob Ingalls.
Yep, and it was Jacob. I didn't know him at the time, but it was Jacob and 2 of his friends. So he came in, and he had a 35 millimeter camera or digital camera with a big lens, and he's taking photos. And right before I started, he got up on the corner of the stage and took a couple of photos out onto the crowd. I think he was actually surprised how many people showed up. It was standing room only in that hall. We started, I had a PowerPoint presentation that I had prepared based on what I had looked up in the Florida statutes was required to incorporate. And I told everybody I'm going to do the PowerPoint, and then we'll do question and answer after that, and we'll talk. And there's a friend of ours that lives in Geneva that was there, that is a deputy sheriff, and he showed up. And he was asked, hey, can you just kind of keep an eye on, in case there's, because it's you people that are very adamant one way or another, and I didn't want to have any issues. So my son at the time was about 17 or 18, and I had asked him to come and help set up and break down the chairs and stuff like that. And he agreed. So we get about 20 minutes into the meeting, and the PowerPoint was done and the lights had come back up. And he came over to me while I was talking on the stage and says, hey, Dad, just so you know, there's 2 guys out there with Nazi shirts. And I said, what? And so he pointed them out, and it was Jacob's 2 friends had taken off their flannels, and they were sitting. One had a shirt that had the SS logo on it,
right,
and another one had like some kind of a swastika and eagle thing on top, and they were sitting there doing this, and Jacob was taking pictures with the crowd behind him. Honestly, at that point, there wasn't really a movement. It was more of just trying to get a feel for what the neighbors thought of the idea of incorporation. Right. And I had no idea who Jacob was. I had no idea what their deal was. But the sheriff's deputy walked over and told them that they were going to leave. In which case, Jacob decided to pull out his press pass, and he's, I'm press. He said, and the sheriff's deputy said, I can ask you to leave by your own power, or I will remove you. But either way, you guys are out of here. And so, they left. Everybody started clapping.
I want to emphasize, I want to sort of pause at this moment to kind of emphasize what we're sort of seeing beginning here, right? Yeah. And that as we sort of laid out, we've got this effort to incorporate Geneva, right? We have a meeting, as you say, not even rising to the level of a movement, just the neighbors getting together to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
And already we begin to see Jacob Ingalls, somebody who we've established in this series is in the pay of Greenberg and associated with Roger Stone. And there was an effort to portray the River Cross development as this sort of like opportunity to bring diversity and low income or mixed income housing to rural Seminole County, right? And so in doing that, there was an effort to portray say rural Seminole, and in fact even you and Brian as almost like segregationists, right? As people who were trying to keep this, ostensible diversity drive that was Dorworth's River Cross development from taking place, right? But I do want to sort of gesture towards this meeting that Brian described for us. It was at a church. It's something Dorworth was required to do as a part of this river cross development. And it's where Beute describes sort of having his galvanizing moment.
Correct.
Could you maybe take us next to that meeting? And if you were there, any recollections you might have of it?
I actually wasn't at the meeting. I had to work that night.
Here's Brian Beute's recollection of that meeting from episode 22.
And then I noticed that there was going to be a meeting at a local church, and it was going to be hosted by Chris Dorworth and Rivercross. If you can imagine being in a large church, probably 1,000 people could fit in there. And I would say probably half the church was full, 400 to 500 people. And in front, presenting this project known as Rivercross, was Chris Dorworth and his attorneys. I noticed that the presenter, or the applicant, Chris Storworth, he made a couple of comments directly to citizens. One time he attempted to take the microphone away from someone, but he made it clear that it was his meeting and that we were all his guests. I looked at Mr. Dorworth, had never met him before, and I said, taking away the microphone, from a citizen who might potentially be your customer, probably doesn't meet the guidelines of PR 101. I'd say a week or so after that, we formulated, officially with the state of Florida, Save Rural Seminole.
Because of the meeting that I had, some mutual friends introduced me to Brian. And Brian and a bunch of people from Chileota were kind of gearing up to build their own organization to try to fight the river cross. And so I was asked to attend a meeting with Brian and a few others, and that's when we started Save Rural Seminole. And we looked at, okay, what if Geneva and Chileota both incorporated at that time? Where would we have map boundaries? How would we do it, et cetera? And it was all in an effort because we felt that there were two county commissioners, possibly a third, that we felt were going to bend and get rid of the rural boundary because they just didn't really care about it. And they didn't see us as any kind of a voice to it's like, oh, those people out there, So there's a lot of money. You get guys like Dorworth, and they'll throw a lot of money in your campaign trust, and you kind of do what they want. So that's what we felt was going to happen. So that meeting went off, and Brian called me and told me about his interpretation of the meeting and what he experienced. And literally, as I hit the button to hang up, another person called me and said, how do I get involved? I'm not going to deal with this guy. He's, we don't trust him at all. He was obnoxious at the meeting. He thinks we're a bunch of hicks. And from what I heard, some stuff was brought up even at that meeting involving race, that, all of the wonderful things he was going to do to help our area to become more diverse. Let me throw out my immediate family member. My sister is mixed race and lives with us, or lived with us for a long time. She's now out of college. My next door neighbor is African American, born in Africa. The neighbor 3 down from him is a Buddhist monk from Thailand. The people that live across the street from them, he passed away a year ago, but she's still alive. They escaped from Beirut during the Civil War. Their kids all live here.
Right. But nonetheless, there was Jacob Ingalls outside of the meeting trying to associate your organization with Nazism, right? And of course he had a couple of friends with access to the type of attire that could make it look that way.
Yeah, and then that's another thing. I mean, where do you buy that kind of stuff?
Right.
You know, I wouldn't know where to go to get a shirt with the SS symbol on it. You know,
right.
They owned ones and they were theirs. You know, so which kind of makes you think.
The River Cross development wasn't going to bring a diversity to the region that wasn't already there. So Brian Beute is at this meeting that Dorworth was required to hold, you know, with the county. Yeah. And you're not there, but you immediately get reaction from it.
Oh, yeah.
When did you have your first encounter with Chris Storworth?
I'd never met him, never spoken to him, never communicated with him in any way, shape, or form until that big first meeting that we had where the county commission was going to decide whether or not to proceed with River Cross. There was the preview to it. They heard 3 or 4 cases before him. He, of course, had an entire row set up with all of his people and his attorney and or attorneys and all of their group. And by that time, we had Save Rural Seminole rolling pretty good. And another group in Chuleota had started up, and it was a similar name. And between the two groups, we showed up with, I want to say, about 600 or 700 people, all wearing green shirts.
Wow.
And it was a very clear, standing room only. The lobby was full, and there were people outside trying to get in. And it sent a pretty clear message out to the county commission that, hey, you really want to think this carefully before you just cave into this guy. They took a break. I think it was like a 10 or 15-minute break. And so I walked out into the lobby to use the bathroom. And the first 2 words, or the first few words from Chris Dorworth to me, because he was walking towards me as I was walking towards the bathroom. And honestly, I didn't even recognize him. I didn't know who he was. But it was, "You're a real asshole," as he walked by me. And I was like, "Oh, thank you." And then it popped into my head, that's Mr. Dorworth walking in. Now, he had called me out several times on Facebook. He had made very disparaging comments on Facebook. And they were always to, I don't want to call them articles, but posts that Jacob Engels would put up, or one of Jacob Engels' fake profiles or pseudo profiles. Chris would get on there and talk about how great his project was. And if I got on and said anything, and I tried to be very middle of the road with my comments, hey, this would be a disaster for the rural area. Hey, this would cost taxpayers millions and millions of dollars to have to put a new bridge in. Chris isn't paying for that. Everybody else is. He would get on and make comments on that, and they were usually really, really nasty. And call me a liar. I don't know what I'm talking about. He's better than everybody else, and I'm an idiot. That was my first actual words with Chris. Was that.
And it wouldn't improve from there, would it?
No, actually, there a couple months later, it got worse.
Right.
So, yeah.
Drawing all of these people together, politically mobilizing them, and not just against River Cross, but for an effort to incorporate unincorporated areas in rural Seminole County, represented not just a threat to River Cross, but a threat to land development in the area more broadly. And in fact, that you were creating like kind of a model for how to oppose these things, and that was being picked up in other parts of the area, and other similar organizations are being started. And so when you it seems like petty, right, on a certain level to think about how Dorworth was behaving and all this sort of stuff. Somebody with plenty of money already, and plenty of power and all this sort of stuff. But when you think about the wealth on the line here, and the threat of your political action, suddenly it seems, I don't want to say more proportionate, but you can understand the animus that Chris Dorworth was acting with was driven by millions of dollars that were being put under threat by this activity.
I mean, it started honestly on Brian's patio. We had 5 or 6 people get together. We discussed, and one lady took notes of what our goals and objectives would be. And it was, try to preserve the rural boundary and the natural state of things out here. How do we get the message out to the rest of the rest of the boundary area people? Because most people don't follow this stuff. They don't even have any idea that any of this stuff is happening until they're driving to work one day with their latte, and they see a tractor pulling down these trees, and then it's like, oh, what the hell happened? So we wanted to get them involved before that. And then the third part of it was establishing a board. And so it was, Brian would be the president. There was another gentleman named Teddy that was involved. I believe his girlfriend or his wife was involved, and they split off. And I was going to be the vice president. I mean, it was just none of us had really done this before. We weren't, political people. We were just, we felt like we were more of, just establishing a group. That was the beginning. We had several other meetings, either at people's homes. We had one at a TGI Fridays, and it was discussing what the objectives would be. And okay, well, what if we got green shirts and sold green shirts for $10? We just wanted to cover the costs and get people to turn out to these meetings. We need to write letters and emails to the commissioners and tell them how opposed we are. And it was that kind of stuff that we were doing to get started. It really grew fast. We were actually quite surprised at how many people were responding. We started a Facebook page, and it was amazing how many people joined and really got involved with it. It was surprising. We had a float in the Geneva parade. It was a flatbed trailer with a sign on it, but still, we were there and had lots of people walking up to us, supporting us. Thank you for doing this. We really appreciate you doing this. Things were quiet for the first couple of months as we kind of geared up. And I believe that's when Dorworth kind of figured out what was going on. He figured out quickly that there were people that were getting involved and opposing his plan. I personally believe, and this is again my own personal feeling, that Dorworth thought that he was just going to go in, file this thing, go to a meeting, stamp, see ya, and he was going to do what he wanted. And I think he was quite surprised when we all showed up to the meeting, because you could tell on his face that he was getting very upset that there were so many people opposed to it. I started getting attacked by Jacob Engels. Started getting Facebook posts tagging me by Jacob Engels with just really, really nasty comments. I had an incident that I'm not proud of that had happened where there was an issue that happened on a job site, and I was arrested. Charges were all dropped the next morning after the facts of the case came out, and people that had left the scene before the police decided to come back and give their viewpoints. That Engels decided to take my mugshot and post it all over Facebook and tag me in it on 7 or 8 different pages and made it sound like I had been convicted. Never even got charged, but I was convicted according to him. He decided to start pulling up other J. Millers or James Millers and tagging stories about their crimes and equating it back to me. Like there's no one else named James Miller in the state of Florida. Things started getting really dirty. And that's about the time that I got the call from Brian one day, middle of the afternoon, and he was incredibly upset because of the letters that he had found out about at the school. And, I consider Brian a very good friend, and I was very upset that it happened because I know he's a good person. I knew he had nothing to do with this. And between 3 or 4 of us, every single one of us felt that it was either Jacob Engels that did it or Jacob Engels that had been part of it. We still had not put the whole connection of Greenberg, Engels, Dorworth, Anderson all together. A week or so later, on a Saturday, middle of the afternoon, I get a phone call. And it was Jacob. And he basically said that he went on and on about his illustrious journalistic history and, all of the accolades that he had gotten, which I found out later on, none of them were actually true. But he basically had stated that because of the situation with Brian and his school, that he was not going to be getting paid by Chris Storworth or Joel Greenberg anymore, and he needed money. And he went into some thinking about moving up to Pennsylvania, and he said that he could make everything that was happening go away if our organization or somebody in our organization would give him $10,000. And I said, why would we do that? And he says, well, Roger Stone gives me money all the time. I write for Roger Stone all the time. And again, I didn't follow politics. So I knew who Roger Stone was because I had heard his name but I didn't know who he was.
Right.
And I said, I don't care. What's the big deal? And he said, well, this is just going to get worse for you guys if you don't stop. You don't understand who my friends are. You don't understand what power we have, basically. He didn't say that, but I surmised it. And you need to let the rest of your friends know that, again, this isn't a lot of money. Just, give it to me and I'll go away. So, of course, I brought it to our organization, and they said, absolutely not. We're not paying that. I felt I had to bring that to them. And a report was made. A couple days went by, and I had been gearing up to deploy with a contractor to Afghanistan for a year. Had already been hired, had all my physicals, everything was done, and I was in the military, and I worked for this company that was a defense contractor, and it was a large project on one of our bases. And I got a call out of the blue, like a week and a half after this whole Jacob, that we'll make this go away call. And he says, yeah, we've got a very concerning letter. And it basically states that you are a convicted felon, multiple time convicted felon. And they've included a bunch of different case numbers and stuff in different jurisdictions that they found that you're there. We're very concerned about the multiple DUIs and the drug arrests. And I said, I've never been arrested for DUI. I've never been stopped for DUI. I don't drink. I've never done drugs. I've never even tried pot, not once in my entire life. And the guy that I was talking to knew me pretty well, and he started laughing. And he says, I know that. And I was reading this, but he goes, you didn't need to understand it. This really does affect your clearance. And we're not going to be able to send you now until this is all cleared up. And it's out of our control. This now goes to the federal government's clearance, and you're going to be in a hold pattern for a while.
Interesting. I had always sort of imagined that Brian was in a much more vulnerable kind of position with his sort of particular circumstance and allegation. I hadn't really considered that it wasn't just your employer who would need to sort of clear these things, that this was that you had a job associated with the government as well, and you ended up with at least a short-term professional repercussion because of this. It
was months to get it cleared.
Wow.
And numerous phone calls back and forth with them. Did I use this alias? Did I ever try this birth date? Et cetera, et cetera. And for most of it, it had to be cleared through fingerprint.
Wow.
So they would take my fingerprints that I'd already submitted and then have to have the FBI compare them to the other case number fingerprints to exclude me, that I was not those suspects. Turned our household pretty much upside down. Not nearly as bad as Brian's, because I have a wife that at the same time was also a military contractor, but she was really upset. Cost me a lot of money. About a month after that, again on a Saturday afternoon, I had a friend call me that asked me if I could help them with something. I was driving to that job. I get a call out of the blue, Chris Dorworth, and slurred speech, just rambling on and on and on. And it was, "You're a complete piece of shit. You're a felon. People need to know the real truth about you. You are a piece of garbage. You're worthless, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." And then towards the end of it, it was, "You don't know what people like me can do to people like you. You need to stop this shit right now. This isn't going to go away for you." And I just let him go. I let him go on and on and on. Again, speech was quite slurred. He rambled. So we can only guess what the circumstances were. I ended up hanging up on him, and he started texting me repeatedly. You're a disgusting slob. You don't know who I am, et cetera, et cetera. So we ended up doing a sheriff's department report. They went out to the house and told him, "Quit, or you're going to go to jail tonight," because it's his phone number, and it says this is Chris Storworth on the thing, and he's going on.
The audacity.
Well, just not even thinking through what you're doing. So I ended up having to go to our attorney, who then took copies of that and forwarded them with a cease and desist letter to Tara Tidro and their whole law group. What I found funny was that it stopped. No other contact from Jacob or Chris.
Right.
And when we sat back and we started looking at the stuff that Chris was saying, was stuff that was not made public about my clearances, about the letters to the government. Now, I was never allowed to have the letter from the government. They would not release that. I was exonerated fully. I ended up deploying. Right before I deployed, I stepped down my position at Save Rural Seminole, and another person took over, which was great. But there were so many circumstances between the letter to Brian, the letter to the government, because it was read to me over the phone. Chris calling, knowing about the letter. Chris calling, knowing about the letters to Brian before that had even gotten out. There were just too many connections, and that was all reported back to the sheriff's department that, hey, these are linked and this is politically motivated. And I believe that's when the sheriff's department really finally said, "You know what? This needs to go to the federal government, because now we're finding out that a constitutional officer is involved."
Right.
That's Greenberg.
Right.
And it spiraled. That's when it started really spiraling out of control.
This is an independently produced podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at COINTELPROPod and support more of our work on our Patreon page. The link is in the show notes and in our Twitter bio. We'll see you next week on COINTELPRO.